Welcome to the Future of Us Bookcast, your gateway to insights shaping our future. Today, we are immersing ourselves in a really critical, a really comprehensive look at the modern workplace. It's all based on the book, The Algorithm, How AI Decides Who Gets Hired, Monitored, Promoted, and Fired. The author is an investigative reporter, Hilke Schellmann, and she basically spent years, tracking the digital breadcrumbs we all leave behind at work every day.
That's absolutely right. And Shellman didn't just focus on, say, hiring. She looked at the entire employee life cycle.
The whole thing.
Yeah, everything. From that first application screen through promotions, day-to-day monitoring, right up to, well, getting fired by email. Her main goal really was to kind of pull back the curtain on the companies selling these AI tools. There's so much secrecy there.
And what she uncovered is, well, it's pretty startling, actually. The main takeaway, the big point of the book, is that our work lives, our careers, are increasingly being run by these opaque algorithms, often untested ones.
Right, totally opaque. And this is creating...
This unregulated Wild West, as she puts it.
Exactly, the Wild West in the workplace. And these big life-altering decisions.
They're the ones that can cause real harm.
Yeah, harm, discrimination, they're being made at this massive scale, even though the promise was always, objectivity, efficiency.
But the reality is messy. So our job today is to unpack some of that chaos for you. Okay, so let's rewind a bit. Just a few years ago, there was this huge fascination, almost like science fiction, right, with AI hiring tools. The book talks about the massive hype around systems like HireVue. They promised this objective, scientific way to predict who'd be good at a job.
Yeah, the idea was the algorithm would analyze everything in your video interview. Your facial expressions, how you sounded, the actual words you used. It was kind of pitched as this magic bullet, right? Offering quick, cheap, and supposedly bias-free hiring.
Sounds great on paper.
Totally. The pitch was basically, let's get rid of messy, subjective human feelings and just use data, clean and simple. But as the book shows right away, there's this huge gap between that promise and what actually happens on the ground.
Why is that?
Well, mostly because the critical human checks, the vetting, the oversight, it often just gets skipped. People trust the tech too much.
And the book kicks off with this really terrifying story that just perfectly captures that gap. It's about Lizzie, a makeup artist in the UK.
Right. So during the pandemic, her company had to do layoffs, and the decision came down to performance, sales numbers, and crucially, this HireVue assessment score. Lizzie was understandably devastated when her manager told her she was being let go.
Even though she was good at her job.
Exactly. The manager specifically said the HireVue score was the reason, despite confirming Lizzie scored full marks on her performance. She was a successful employee by human standards. But the AI, it gave her a 0 on that assessment.
A 0. Wow. I mean, imagine being told your potential is literally 0, especially when your boss thinks you're doing great work.
It's crushing. And that's why she fought it. She lost her job, her income, but she took legal action. Eventually, she got access to the raw data they used, and that's when the really chilling truth came out.
What is it?
The HireVue assessment. The one that got her fired. It was never actually scored.
Wait, what?
Yeah. There was a technical glitch. A simple software bug in the algorithm assigned her this baseline 0 by mistake.
And nobody caught it? Not HR, not the manager?
Nobody. Not even when she appealed the decision. Nobody caught the error. It's just a stark, immediate example of how fragile this tech can be and the real concrete harm it causes when we trust it blindly.
That story just immediately blows up the whole idea that AI is somehow perfect or better than humans, doesn't it? We hear all the time about how AI is transforming everything, but the book calls the current situation in employment tech an unregulated Wild West.
Absolutely.
So if you listening right now have ever wondered, why didn't I get that promotion? Or why didn't I hear back about that job I was perfect for? The book suggests maybe, just maybe, you're blaming yourself when the real culprit was just a faulty algorithm, a piece of bad code.
And this isn't just some small fringe issue. The scale we're talking about is enormous. These systems are embedded everywhere in our economy right now.
Which brings us to a quote. This one's from Matthew Scherer. He's a leading employment lawyer. He really nails the urgency. The vast majority of the tools that are available today are not ready for prime time.
Wow. Yeah, that hits hard, doesn't it? Not ready for prime time.
And it makes you think.
And the data backs him up. Since COVID started, over half of large U.S. employers use AI to monitor at least some employees. And 8 out of the 10 biggest U.S. employers track productivity metrics using AI. This isn't science fiction. It's happening now, affecting millions of people daily.
And often that automated decision-making starts way earlier than an interview. It starts with resume screeners. The book tells the story of Sophie, a Black female software developer, also a veteran, highly qualified.
Incredibly qualified. Computer engineer, veteran status, master's in data science. Just ticks all the boxes, right?
You'd think so. But she applied for 146 jobs, and she found it almost impossible to get past that first text screen. She hardly ever got to talk to an actual person.
Sophie's story really highlights a huge systemic problem. Resume screeners are kind of notorious for bias. Race, gender. It gets baked in.
How does that happen?
Because they're trained on historical hiring data. And let's be honest, past hiring practices weren't always fair or representative. The classic example everyone points to is Amazon's experiment, right? Yeah. Their AI started downgrading resumes with the word women in them.
Because the training data was mostly men.
Exactly. From a male-dominated tech field. The backlash was so bad that now many companies make vendors, even their own staff, sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements.
So they can keep the whole screening process secret.
Pretty much, which makes it even harder to challenge.
And this secrecy hides the core technical issue, which is how these algorithms learn. It's all about correlation.
Right. They look for keywords, patterns, anything that correlates with past success in the data.
But correlation isn't causation, right? That's the key.
Precisely. If the pattern the AI finds doesn't have a logical job-related connection, it can lead to what's called adverse impact discrimination. It hits protected groups based on race, gender, age, even if the algorithm isn't explicitly told to look for those things. It looks objective, but it's not.
That seems really hard to regulate.
It is. Ken Wilner, another employment attorney in the book, gave this really clear, kind of chilling analogy for it. Let's say you train your algorithm on an employer that has mostly men in a particular job. The algorithm could look for shoe size, and people with a larger shoe size may be associated with doing well.
Shoe size?
Seriously. That's not related logically to job performance. It just happens to be a correlation that may exist. But it also may happen to have an adverse impact on women who have smaller shoe sizes on average.
That's bizarre and really insidious.
Yeah.
You're not discriminating based on gender directly, but on something linked to gender. It's kind of like, I don't know, like rejecting a really great chef just because they drive a blue car.
Right.
Just because, maybe all the chefs you hired before drove blue cars.
Exactly. The correlation's there in your old data, but it means absolutely nothing about cooking ability. Zero. Or job performance in this case.
Is the law catching up to this at all?
Slowly. Very slowly. The book mentions a really important case from 2022. The EEOC, that's the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, sued a company called iTutor Group. They accused them of using algorithms to automatically reject women over 55 and men over 60.
Wow. Age discrimination via algorithm.
Yep. And they settled for $365,000. It was a landmark case, the first big EEOC lawsuit about AI bias. It sent a message.
But beyond the bias, there's also just sheer inefficiency. The book talks about broken pipelines.
Yeah, that's from Harvard professor Joe Fuller. His research shows these tools are often designed just to shrink the applicant pool, make it manageable. They look for really specific things like certain degrees or exact keywords from the job description. It feels precise, but it often backfires. Companies are kind of shooting themselves in the foot. Well, look at what the book calls ballooning job descriptions. It's crazy. Like, an entry-level retail clerk job might now list an average of 31 required skills.
31 for entry-level retail.
Right. And then the AI rigidly screens out anyone missing even one nice-to-have skill.
Yeah.
It gives managers this false sense of precision, like they must have hired the best.
But they haven't necessarily.
Often, no. Fuller actually confirmed this with one executive. Their company system was set up so rigidly, it rejected candidates who scored almost perfectly on nearly everything, but got a 0 on the very last criterion.
So it kicked out the top people.
Exactly. It filtered out the really strong candidates, leaving them with a pool of just average, middle-of-the-road people. They were basically hiring for mediocrity because the tool was just designed to gut numbers, not actually find the best talent.
Yeah.
Okay, so if the first hurdle, the resume screener, is flawed, what's next? The industry answer seems to be, let's look at personality. Chapter 2 in the book dives into this. It's called Cambridge Analytica for Work.
Ooh, that sounds ominous.
It is. It looks at tools from companies like IBM, Humantic AI, Crystal. They claim to analyze huge amounts of your personal data, social media feeds, stuff you write at work.
To predict your personality and how you'll behave on the job.
That's the pitch, which, as the chapter title suggests, sounds worryingly similar to Cambridge Analytica, right?
Yeah, the political firm that used Facebook data to build psychological profiles, the big five ocean traits, to target voters.
Exactly. We mostly agree that crossed a line ethically, politically, but now very similar tactics are being used, often secretly, to decide if you get hired.
And this completely shifts the power balance, doesn't it?
Dramatically. Things like background checks, which used to be a one-off manual thing, can now become this automated, constant surveillance of your public life.
And you might not even know what's happening or what they're looking for.
Often, no, you don't know you're being assessed or what data points are being used against you.
The book gives this example of extreme vetting. Kai Moore's story.
Yeah, that one is genuinely chilling. Moore was run through an AI system called FAMA. It scanned their social media and flagged things that were completely harmless as bad or risky.
Like what kind of things?
Things Moore just liked on Twitter, not even stuff they wrote. Tweets mentioning a cool-ass candle holder or alcohol, totally innocuous stuff.
And the AI flagged that as bad.
It labeled Moore a consider risk, not clear, which just shows the tech has zero common sense. No context, no nuance, it's just pattern matching, often crudely.
The ACLU quote in the book really sums this up, I think.
Yeah, Jay Stanley from the ACLU, he puts it very sharply.
Let me read that one. The automated processing of human speech, including social media, is extremely unreliable, even with the most advanced AI. Computers just don't get context. I hate to think of people being unfairly rejected from jobs because some computer decides they have a bad attitude or some other red flag.
Computers just don't get context. That's the core of it, isn't it?
So, to test if these personality tools are even accurate, Schellmann, the author, did her own experiment.
Right. She teamed up with an expert, Tomas Chamorro-Premusic, and they ran their own data LinkedIn profiles, Twitter feeds, through two big personality prediction tools, Humantic AI and Crystal.
And the results.
Total chaos, basically. The algorithms completely failed to agree. They generated wildly different personality profiles for the same person, sometimes just minutes apart.
But isn't personality supposed to be relatively stable?
Yeah.
Especially in adults.
Exactly. That's what decades of psychological research tells us. So if these high-tech tools spit out contradictory results so quickly, they have to be fundamentally flawed, right?
So if they're so inconsistent, why are companies still buying and using them? It seems like throwing money away on a random number generator.
Well, I think it comes down to convenience and the appearance of certainty. Accuracy doesn't always sell as well. The expert in the book points out this risk. Companies might prioritize getting a result, any result, over getting an accurate one.
Because saying we don't know isn't good for business.
Pretty much. It might not be good business for an algorithm to say, hey, I don't have enough data to be sure. So instead, it just generates a neat profile, even if its internal confidence is really low.
Like a 60% match on facial recognition being used in arrests.
Exactly that kind of problem. It creates huge risks, especially in hiring. What's really being sold is often the illusion of data-driven control, not actual reliable insight.
Okay, so we've seen issues with resume screeners, problems with scanning social media, which brings us to Chapter 3, the games we play. This chapter looks at gamified assessments. These are AI-driven games from companies like Pymetrics, Plum, Arctic Shores. They're meant to replace old-school personality tests or even resumes.
Right, and this is a big shift in the industry. The idea behind the games is to measure your behavioral traits, your cognitive abilities, your soft skills, basically your raw potential.
Less about what you know now, more about your capacity to learn.
Exactly. Because skills change so fast now, that World Economic Forum stat, 40% of core skills changing by 2025 companies want people who are adaptable. And the marketing pitch is that these games reduce human bias, and they're harder for candidates to fake or game the answers compared to a questionnaire.
But do people even understand how these games relate to the job? The book talks about face validity.
Yeah, that's a huge issue. A face validity just means, does the test obviously look like it measures what it's supposed to measure? Do you, as the applicant, get the connection? The book uses the story of Martin Birch. He was highly qualified for a data processing job at Bloomberg, applied, and immediately got sent a link to take a gamified assessment from Plum.
And he didn't see the connection.
Not at all. He was completely confused. He's doing these tests, maybe involving complex block patterns or something, and thinking, what on earth does this have to do with scraping financial data?
That sounds stressful in itself.
Totally. And then, shortly after finishing the test, boom, automated rejection email based purely on his scores in a game he didn't understand. Naturally, he wanted to know more.
So his experience led the author to dig into the science behind these games.
Right. How do they actually work? Take Pymetrics, for example. Their model often involves having current successful employees play the games first. That creates the training data. Then they compare applicants' scores to that successful employee profile and maybe also to a general population baseline.
But isn't there a risk there? What if the successful employees are all really similar?
Exactly. That's the pitfall. If your sample of top performers is skewed, say, mostly white men from certain universities, the algorithm might just pick up on traits that correlate with that group, not traits that actually predict job success for everyone. It just ends up baking in the existing bias.
The book had an example of this, right, with healthcare workers.
Yeah, a great cautionary tale from a competitor. They looked at healthcare workers and found something interesting. The high performers and the low performers were actually equally warm, friendly, and agreeable compared to the general population.
So being warm and friendly didn't predict success in that job.
Nope. But here's the kicker, and this is a key quote about the danger of flawed training data. An example where high and low performing healthcare workers were equally warm, friendly, and agreeable compared to the general population. If companies only check high performers against the general population, they might find something that distinguishes the high performers, but that might not be a predictor of success.
Ah, I see. So if they only compare the high performers to the general public, they might find, say, like slightly higher warmth scores and think, aha, warmth predicts success.
Right. When in reality, it might just be noise in the data, or something true of all their healthcare workers, not just the top ones. It's not actually predicting who does well.
So if these games are measuring abstract traits, their actual power to predict job success must be pretty low.
Shockingly low. The book goes into an analysis by that same employment lawyer, Matthew Scherer. He looked at Plum's own technical report for their games.
And what did he find?
His math showed that Plum's talent match scores could only account for somewhere between 1.7% and 18.5% of actual job performance.
Wait, hang on. 1.7 to 18.5%. That means what? Like 81 to 98% of someone's success on the job has nothing to do with this test they're using to hire them.
Precisely. It's a stunning finding, isn't it? These tools are sold as essential gatekeepers, deciding who gets in the door, but they're measuring things that barely correlate with whether someone can actually do the job well. You're potentially paying a fortune for results that are almost random.
And Martin Birch, the guy rejected by the game, he actually fought back using GDPR.
He did. Because he was in the UK, he could use their strong data protection laws, the GDPR, specifically Article 22(1).
What does that article do?
It gives people the right not to be subject to a decision based solely on automated processing, especially if it has significant effects like getting rejected for a job.
And he proved his rejection was automatic.
Yes. The investigation confirmed it. The initial rejection from Plum was indeed automatic under that law.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Because vendors and companies always say, there's always a human in the loop.
Right.
But this proves that's not always true. In Birch's case, the algorithm, based on those very weak predictive scores, was the judge and jury. It automatically filtered him out.
And given that personality traits generally only correlate with maybe 5% of job performance.
Right. Using these games, which aim to measure those traits, as an automatic knockout tool seems incredibly flawed. The predictive value just isn't there to justify automatic decisions. Okay, if the games feel shaky, Chapter 4 gets into something that feels even more invasive. Video interviews analyzed by AI. We're talking about those one-way interviews. You record yourself answering questions, and then AI tools like HireVue or Retorio analyze your words, your voice, even your facial expressions to give you a score.
Yeah, it feels very futuristic, maybe even a bit creepy. The author, Schellmann, actually tried one herself. She took a Retorio assessment and scored 93%.
93%. That must feel good, right? Instant validation.
It does give you a confidence boost, sure, but the book argues it's potentially meaningless confidence. Because the real reason companies use these tools is just to save time. The investigation found that vendors often explicitly tell their clients not to bother watching the actual videos for most candidates.
Really? Don't watch the interview.
Right. The whole point for them is to reduce the screening burden. Just look at the AI score. Focus only on the top-ranked people, which confirms the AI score itself is often the real gatekeeper.
And we know these systems use automatic rejection, just like the games.
Absolutely. The book uncovered internal emails that prove it. This one quote is pretty damning. It's from HireVue's own chief psychologist about a client, Atlanta Public Schools.
Internal email from HireVue's chief psychologist regarding Atlanta Public Schools. They are excited to start using the assessment with a 33% cut score. This sick anyone scoring at 33 or lower will be a not pass.
A cut score. It's a hard threshold. Below 33%, you're automatically out, not pass.
So much for a human always makes the final call.
Exactly. This email proves that automated rejection systems are very much in use, whatever the public messaging might be.
Now, one of the really controversial things HireVue used to do was analyze facial movements, right? Smiles, frowns,
Yeah.
to figure out emotions or thinking styles.
Yeah, they did. And it was based on science that's now widely considered, well, outdated or just plain wrong. Psychology professor Lisa Feldman Barrett is a major critic mentioned in the book. She argues that the whole idea of universal facial expressions for basic emotions, like Paul Ekman's theory, which HireVue relied on, just doesn't hold up.
How so?
Facial expressions are incredibly variable. They depend on culture, context, the individual. They aren't reliable signals of some specific underlying emotion or thought process, so trying to measure them to predict job performance is just scientifically shaky, to say the least.
This leads to that kind of funny but also seriously discriminatory idea the book raises,
Yeah.
the resting bitch face problem.
Right. If the AI learns from current top performers that say they don't tend to scowl when they're concentrating hard,
Then someone new applies, and their natural concentration face is a scowl.
the algorithm might penalize them. It flags that facial pattern as negative based on the training data, even though it has absolutely nothing to do with their ability to do the job. You're basically getting binged for your involuntary facial structure.
So to really expose how flawed this focus on expression and tone is, the author did the gibberish test.
Yes, this was brilliant. She used 2 different video AI systems, Curious Thing AI and My Interview. The task was simple: answer the English interview questions, but do it in German or Chinese.
And not even fluently, right? She was just reading random text.
Exactly. Reading a Wikipedia entry about psychometrics in German, for example. Total nonsense in the context of the interview question.
And what happened? Did the AI systems crash? Say, error?
Nope. That's the shocking part. They failed to flag any errors. They generated these completely garbled, nonsensical transcripts, as you'd expect. But they still assigned her high match scores. Some were 73%, even 80%.
Based on what? Not the words, clearly.
Based mostly on things like her tone of voice, her pitch variation, maybe her speaking case, completely ignoring the fact that the content was meaningless gibberish.
An expert quoted in the book was pretty baffled by this.
Yeah, Professor Fred Oswald. His reaction really sums it up. After hearing the German test result, Professor Fred Oswald said, "A high fit to the job based on random input doesn't seem appropriate. Results should be reliable, and it should be clear why an AI made a decision, which is pretty muddled in this case."
Pretty muddled feels like an understatement. It just drives home that relying on your tone of voice to predict, say, attention to detail.
It's like judging how fast a car can go by looking at its paint color. It's just an irrelevant metric that feels vaguely scientific because a machine measured it.
And this lack of scientific grounding has terrible real-world impacts, especially for people with disabilities.
Absolutely. The book talks to employment specialists like Sophie Powell and Patty Sanchez. They constantly struggle to get basic accommodations for clients who are deaf or hard of hearing.
Why? Because the system rejects them first.
Exactly. The automated systems, the video tools, the games, they often reject the application before there's ever a chance for a human conversation about needing an accommodation, like a sign language interpreter for an interview.
And the core problem is the training data again.
Yes, these AI tools often have little or no representation of people with disabilities in their training data, so they learn a very narrow definition of normal input. Think about those timed games requiring quick reactions or precise movements. They can easily screen out people with motor impairments, or speech-to-text systems that make more errors transcribing someone with a speech disability, leading to lower scores.
It just perpetuates existing inequalities in the workforce.
It really does. And while the EEOC did issue guidance in 2022 to try and hold companies accountable, the book points out how slow the legal system is to adapt. There's an argument from law professor Ifeoma Ajinwa that the law needs to change. Applicants should be able to challenge a tool's design, like a timed test for someone with a motor issue, without first having to prove they suffered specific individual harm. Shift the burden onto the company to prove their tool is fair.
Okay, so we spent a lot of time talking about getting in the door, the hiring process. But the book makes it clear, once you're hired, the AI doesn't just disappear.
Not at all. It pivots. It starts managing your future inside the company. Chapter 7 really digs into this, starting with internal mobility.
Internal mobility,
How?
like promotions, moving between departments.
Exactly. And this is becoming huge because of labor shortages and how fast skills are changing. Companies are realizing it's often easier and better to find and upskill the people they already have. It's sometimes called quiet hiring.
Filling roles from within.
Right. And this is actually an area where AI seems to show some, genuinely positive potential. Vendors like Eightfold, Gloat, Fuel 50, they build these really sophisticated internal talent marketplaces.
And what makes them different?
Crucially, they tend to focus less on old school credentials, like needing a specific college degree, and more on the granular skills employees actually have or could realistically learn.
The book mentioned Eightfold's AI being particularly smart about this. Inferring skills.
Yeah, it's clever. It uses inference. Like, if your profile says you know the programming language Python, the AI can reasonably infer you probably know other related languages or data science concepts, even if you haven't listed them explicitly.
And then it suggests jobs or training based on that.
Right. It maps out these skill adjacencies.
Yep.
It shifts the focus from what have you done in the past to, based on your skills, could you do this new thing?
That sounds like it could really open doors for people.
It really could. It widens the talent pool inside the company and can increase diversity by getting past those sometimes arbitrary degree requirements. The book gives some fascinating examples of these transferable skill sets the AI finds.
Like what?
Things like flight attendants being a great match for customer service roles, high empathy, communication skills, or prison guards matching well with veterinary technicians needing communication, strength, compassion under pressure, even pest control workers matching with meter readers.
Huh. Okay, I wouldn't have thought of those connections.
Right. It's looking at underlying capabilities, not just job titles. And that can be really powerful and, frankly, more equitable.
But there's always a but, isn't there? This pattern recognition capability.
Yeah.
It's a double-edged sword.
Very much so. Eightfold, for instance, claims it can predict an employee's next 2 likely roles with something like a 90% accuracy. It also tracks how fast people move through their careers.
And the danger is?
The danger is that the AI learns what's normal or optimal according to the historical data. Usually that means a fast career trajectory, constant upskilling, always being engaged.
So what happens if you don't fit that pattern?
That's the concern. What about employees who deviate? Someone takes extended parental leave, usually women. Someone works part-time due to health reasons. Someone just progresses more slowly because they prioritize work-life balance. If the AI is trained only on the fast-track data, it might flag these perfectly reasonable human variations as unusual or somehow suboptimal. It penalizes lives that don't fit the optimized pattern the machine expects. Human lives are messy. AI prefers neat patterns.
That fear of losing people, especially top performers, leads right into the next big use case in Chapter 7, predicting flight risk.
Right. Who's likely to quit? Companies are pouring money into this. The book highlights PepsiCo using algorithms from a vendor called Vizier. These systems are trained on data from employees who have left in the past. Then they analyze current employees based on similar factors.
What kinds of factors?
Things like engagement scores, absenteeism, recent changes in performance reviews, how long it's been since their last promotion, even how active they are on LinkedIn.
Does it actually work? Can they really predict who will quit?
Well, that's debatable. One analyst in the book makes a great point. Predicting individual human behavior is actually way harder than predicting complex physics. The accuracy for predicting if a specific person will leave can apparently drop below 50%.
Below 50%.
Yeah.
Worse than just flipping a coin.
Literally worse than a coin toss in
Yeah.
some cases. Which raises the question, what are companies actually paying for?
Maybe just the feeling of control. Or a data-driven excuse to do something they wanted to do anyway.
That could be part of it. And the fallibility was proven pretty starkly by Nidya Serna, who was an HR manager at PepsiCo herself. She ran the predictor on herself out of curiosity. It gave her a score indicating only a 0.03% chance of quitting.
And
then she left the company just a few months later. So yeah, these massive data sets don't guarantee they can predict what any single individual will do.
Okay, but managers are still getting these scores. And the book warns about the danger of a self-fulfilling prophecy. How does that work? How does being flagged as likely to leave actually make you leave?
It's basic behavioral economics, but applied in a really negative way. Think about it from the manager's perspective. If the system flags a high performer as a low flight risk, maybe the manager thinks, great, they're stable. If it flags a high performer as a high flight risk, the manager might intervene, offer a bonus, a promotion, try to keep them. But what if the system flags someone, maybe an average performer, maybe even a high performer, the manager doesn't personally value as much as likely to leave?
The manager thinks, why bother investing in them?
Exactly. Why waste training resources or consider them for that promotion if they're just going to quit anyway? The manager can't unknow that flight risk score. So, consciously or unconsciously, they start pulling back on opportunities, mentorship raises. They create the very stagnation and dissatisfaction that pushes the employee out the door. Their prediction becomes reality because of their reaction to it.
That's really concerning. And the data these systems use can be incredibly sensitive too, right?
Oh, yeah. Some software, like Splash BI mentioned in the book, pulls in data points that feel deeply personal. Stuff gleaned from your benefits information, like if you drop your spouse from your health plan, which might signal a divorce, or if you add a new child. Plus things like how far you commute.
Wait, commuting distance. How is that relevant to flight risk?
It probably isn't, logically, but it might correlate in the historical data. And worse, commuting distance is often highly correlated with race and socioeconomic status because of historical segregation, things like redlining.
So using it introduces bias.
It absolutely can. It shows a real lack of critical thinking about which data points are appropriate to use. Just because data is available doesn't mean it should be fed into a predictive model for something like job retention. It's a recipe for accidental systemic discrimination.
All right, moving into Chapter 8. This one feels particularly intense. We are watching and measuring. It's all about digital surveillance at work. The book describes AI enabling employers to have, and this is a quote, a physical supervisor attached to your hip every second of every day.
Yeah, it's moved beyond just monitoring factory floors or warehouses. It's deeply embedded in white-collar, remote work now, too. Constant tracking.
The story of Emily Smith, the medical coder working from home, that sounded incredibly stressful.
It's one of the most vivid accounts. She was subjected to constant keystroke tracking, really strict limits on idle time, flagging of websites she visited. She described having to constantly jiggle her mouse while she was reading patient charts, which was a core part of her job requiring focus, just so the system wouldn't ding her for being inactive.
She even timed her bathroom breaks.
Set a 2-minute timer, yeah. Terrified of going over her allotted break time. And then, to make it even worse, her supervisors would send out daily emails ranking all the employees from most productive down to least productive.
Oh my God. Public ranking.
Yeah. Imagine the pressure, the anxiety, the burnout that creates. It's extreme.
And does all this stress even lead to better work? Does the monitoring achieve its goal?
According to the research cited in the book, no. Tara Barrand, a professor at Michigan State, makes this point very clearly. Being monitored for your performance does increase your stress, does increase your negative attitudes, but it doesn't accomplish the goal that it is meant to accomplish, which is to improve your performance.
So it makes people stressed and unhappy, but doesn't make them work better. Why do companies keep doing it then? The only logical result seems to be people will just find ways to cheat the system.
And they do. That's the human response to this kind of rigid, algorithmic control.
Yeah.
You game it. The book talks about this whole cottage industry that sprang up selling mouse jigglers.
Mouse jigglers?
Yeah, little physical devices or USB sticks that simulate mouse movement, tricking the system into thinking you're actively working, keeping those productivity scores high.
So employees are just performing for the algorithm, not actually doing productive work necessarily. It's all theater?
Exactly. Corporate surveillance theater. And it's not just niche software. Even huge companies like Microsoft are involved. The book details tools like Microsoft Purview, originally called Productivity Score, then Adoption Score. These tools can scan almost everything. Emails, Teams chats, files copied to USB drives.
Ostensibly to detect insider threats,
Yeah.
right? Like data leaks?
That's the justification. And Microsoft claims the data is anonymized at the individual level.
Right.
But the book points out a major privacy loophole. These systems generate risk signals that are often tied to specific pivotal events, like someone giving their resignation notice. When that happens, it's apparently quite easy for system administrators to de-anonymize the data and see exactly what that specific employee was doing leading up to their departure. So the anonymity is fragile, very dependent on internal company policies not being abused.
The fundamental problem with all this monitoring seems to be the rigidity of the metrics.
Totally. These algorithmic productivity scores enforce this harsh one-size-fits-all approach. It completely ignores legitimate individual circumstances.
Like what?
Like someone needing a temporary slowdown due to pregnancy complications, or a flare-up of a chronic illness, or even just a mechanical breakdown of equipment they rely on. The algorithm doesn't care about context. It just sees numbers dipping below target.
Advocates call the Amazon warehouse model a digital sweatshop for this reason, right? The relentless focus on time off task, the fixed make rates.
Exactly. Because it ignores human needs and variation. Charlotte Burrows, the chair of the EEOC, is quoted warning that this overly rigid application of a productivity algorithm can easily lead to illegal discrimination, especially against workers who need reasonable accommodations under the law. The systems often fail to accommodate the basic human realities of work. Okay, Chapter 9 takes a slightly different turn. It moves into what seems like a more positive space. Using data for employee wellness programs, "We're Ready to Help" is the chapter title. The stated goal is usually good, right? Improve employee health, which saves the company money on health insurance premiums, maybe create a more supportive workplace.
And this often starts with things like fitness trackers, offering discounts for hitting step goals.
Yeah, that's a common entry point. The book gives the example of Regal Plastic Supply. They offered financial incentives for employees who met fitness goals using company-provided trackers.
Seems harmless enough on the surface.
On the surface, maybe, but the potential for misuse is immediate. The CEO of Regal Plastics, Wayne Gono, was apparently observed checking up on an employee's step count right after that employee had heart surgery.
Oof. Even if he meant well, that feels like a boundary crossed.
Definitely. Once that sensitive health data is collected by the employer, who controls it? How is it used? It raises big questions right away.
And it gets way more invasive than just step counts, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The book talks about personalized benefits software.
Yeah, this is where it gets really sophisticated and maybe creepy. Software from companies like Alight, which the book says is used by something like 70% of Fortune 100 companies. This software doesn't just look at HR data. It pulls in data from employees' health insurance claims, their 401k activity, wealth data. It synthesizes everything.
To do what?
To personalize benefit recommendations and nudges. The book uses this fictional example, Aiden, to illustrate. The AI sees Aiden dropped his spouse from his health plan, maybe predicting a divorce. It sees he took out 401k loans, maybe he hasn't taken vacation time.
And then the system targets him.
It prioritizes sending him nudges about mental health resources, maybe links to financial advisors. It's trying to be helpful based on these incredibly personal data points it has access to.
That's the definition of a creepy nudge, isn't it? Helpful maybe, but how did it know all that?
Exactly. And even an Alight vice president quoted in the book admits they struggle with this. Alight vice president acknowledged, "We have to constantly walk the line between the personalization that will bring that value versus feeling creepy."
The really big concern here has to be the medical data, right? Alight admits they access health claims. What happens to that info?
That's the million-dollar question. The book raises all the red flags. Could this data be traded or sold? What about security breaches? What if the AI starts predicting really sensitive conditions, STDs, depression, maybe even an abortion based on search history or claims data? Even if the employer doesn't directly use that prediction, could third-party vendors subtly use it to shape insurance rates or even future job opportunities if the data leaks or is shared? It's a huge Pandora's box.
And the monitoring is going even deeper now, beyond actions, into the brain and voice.
Yeah, we're entering really uncharted territory. The book mentions things like SmartCap, used in Australia to monitor truck driver and miner fatigue, using EEG sensors, literally tracking brainwaves and storing them in the cloud. Similar tech is apparently used in some Chinese factories and even schools to monitor attention levels or emotional spikes.
Wow. And vocal biomarkers, too, analyzing the voice itself.
Right. Companies like Ellipsis Health or Son Health, their AI claims to detect signals of anxiety or depression not from the words you say, but from the underlying biological qualities of your voice. The pitch, the rhythm, the tremor.
The book mentions an experiment with this at Menlo College.
Yeah, during the pandemic, students could use the Ellipsis Health tool to get an anxiety-depression score based on their voice recordings. Some found it helpful, like a self-monitoring tool. But the technology is incredibly early stage. There's very little independent validation, no real ground truth testing yet. And the privacy implications are massive, especially if this kind of tech started being used passively, say, analyzing voices during mandatory work meetings without explicit ongoing consent.
It really brings home that final warning in the book about neuroscience getting closer to decoding thoughts.
Right. Nita Farahany's work is cited, warning that we're getting closer to reading simple words, tracking attention, even drowsiness, just from brain signals. The brain is fundamentally the last private space we have. The book argues we have to grapple with regulating these monitoring and predictive technologies now before they become so embedded we can't roll them back.
So the final chapter, chapter 10, really brings it full circle. Fired by an algorithm. It comes back to the algorithm as the ultimate boss, the one making the final, fateful decision. We even revisit Lizzie, the makeup artist from the very beginning.
Right. And her story, at least, has a resolution. She persisted, took legal action, and eventually got an admission from the company that, yes, the higher view error was the reason she was terminated. She received a settlement. So in her case, it was confirmed a technical glitch, not her performance, cost her her job.
But she's likely the exception, right? Most people fired by an algorithm probably can't prove it.
Exactly. For most workers, especially in less regulated sectors or the gig economy, fighting back is almost impossible because the system is a black box. You don't know why you were deactivated or fired. The book gives these harrowing examples from Amazon Flex drivers like Claire Grove and Vicky Graham. They're managed entirely by these buggy apps.
Penalized for things they can't control.
Totally. Faulty GPS, sending them down roads that don't exist. Depot delays, making them late for deliveries, which then counts against them. Flat tires. Stuff happens, but the algorithm doesn't care.
And Claire Grove was actually fired by email.
Yep. A cold, impersonal, automated email. Subject line, hello. It said she was terminated for not attempting all assigned deliveries on multiple occasions. This came just 3 days after she'd received notice of having high reliability rates. It made no sense to her. She was convinced it was an algorithm that fired her, a machine that didn't know or care about the context of her workdays.
And her suspicion was actually confirmed by Amazon itself.
Incredibly, yes. Not directly to her, but in a legal filing. During a dispute with the National Labor Relations Board about warehouse workers, Amazon stated plainly that termination notices for warehouse workers who don't meet the required productivity rates are generated automatically by the system with no input from supervisors.
Wow. Generated automatically. No human input. The algorithm is the boss. It's the judge, jury, and executioner.
Precisely. It perfectly illustrates the dehumanizing reality of what critics call the digital sweatshop. Work, especially in places like warehouses, is broken down into these tiny repetitive tasks. And your fate keeping your job depends entirely on hidden productivity targets set and monitored by an algorithm. Make rate, they call it.
And the human managers on the floor, they have no power.
Often, very little. The book describes managers being forced to read out computer-generated warning messages to employees, feeling powerless to override the machine even when they know there's a legitimate reason for the dip in performance, like the worker's father just died or the conveyor belt broke down.
Matthew Sherr, the lawyer we mentioned earlier, he had a quote summing this up, didn't he? About the power shift.
Yes, it really captures the core issue. The use of these technologies is not only increasing employers' power, but it's decreasing their incentive to take into account individual variations and workers' circumstances. It encourages them to take this rigid, one-size-fits-all approach to monitoring their workforce.
That invisibility of the algorithm.
Yeah.
It makes it so hard for workers to push back.
Almost impossible sometimes. They're reduced to doing their own kind of counter-surveillance, meticulously documenting every single equipment failure, every delay caused by management, just to have any evidence to potentially refute the algorithm's claim that they weren't working fast enough. There's no real due process when your boss is just lines of code. So as Schellmann wraps up this huge investigation in the epilogue, Living in a Predictive Society, a really fundamental problem comes into focus. It's the profound lack of skepticism, the lack of rigorous vetting by the companies buying these AI tools.
They just want an easy button.
Pretty much. They want a simpler, faster solution, not a harder, more complex one. And frankly, most companies just don't have the deep expertise needed to properly evaluate these systems. The book suggests you'd need multiple PhDs in psychology, data science, employment law to really understand if a tool is valid and fair. Most HR departments don't have that.
And the investigation found many tools just aren't very good.
That's putting it mildly. The book uses blunt language, saying many tools are essentially shitty and often no better at predicting job success than, quote, randomly picking a candidate's name out of a hat.
But the vendors don't have much incentive to prove otherwise.
Not really. Rigorous, ongoing validation is expensive, and the market often rewards confidence over caution. There's that stark quote from Eric Seidel, formerly of a company called Modern Hire.
Science doesn't sell.
Oof. Yeah, that says a lot about the market dynamics, doesn't it? Vendors keep promising that with enough data, they can accurately predict really complex social outcomes, who will succeed in a job, who will reoffend, who will quit.
But the actual scientific evidence doesn't really back that up, especially for AI compared to simpler methods.
Not nearly as much as claimed. The book highlights the findings from this incredible research project called the Fragile Families Challenge. It's definitive proof against the hype.
What did that study involve?
Hundreds of research teams were given access to this massive data set, over 12,000 variables, about thousands of families followed over many years. Their task was to use any machine learning technique they wanted to predict 6 key life outcomes for the kids in these families. Things like their GPA, whether the family would be evicted, if the parents would be laid off.
So a real-world test of predictive power using cutting-edge AI on huge data.
Exactly. And the results were humbling, to say the least, for the AI boosters. Even the most sophisticated machine learning models performed really poorly. The very best prediction accuracy they achieved for any outcome was only 0.23, where 1.0 would be perfect prediction. So, not great.
But here's the killer finding, right? Comparing AI to simpler models.
Yes, this is the crucial insight. Simpler, traditional statistical models, the kind sociologists have used for decades, using just 4 basic, easy-to-get variables like past GPA or mother's education, performed almost exactly as well as the most complex AI algorithms that used all 12,000 variables.
Wow. Okay, so what does that mean? If complex AI is barely better than a simple four-factor model, why are we investing so much in this opaque complexity?
It means that, at least for predicting complex human behavior and social outcomes, AI isn't some magic bullet. It's not substantially better than simpler, more transparent methods we already had, yet it's being sold and used to justify these high-stakes decisions, hiring, firing, loans, parole, partly because its complexity creates a shield. It's hard to argue with a black box.
And the ultimate worry is where this leads, a society constantly predicting our potential.
That's the fear expressed in the book, that everything we do, every click, every pause, every online interaction will be captured and fed into algorithms computing our future potential, our risk scores, our value, turning our whole lives into this never-ending job interview.
Which brings us back to that need for action. We need to regulate this now, especially with things like brain reading tech on the horizon. We need rules before it's too late.
Exactly. We need to ensure technology serves human dignity and fairness, not just corporate efficiency or predictive control. Hashtag tag tag 1210. Outro troll.
Okay, let's try to quickly summarize the main arguments we've pulled from the book, The Algorithm. First, AI being used in the workplace today is largely unregulated and frankly often operates on shaky science, relying on correlations that don't really mean anything for job success.
Second, these algorithmic systems for hiring, promotion, monitoring, even firing, they don't eliminate bias. They often just perpetuate existing biases or even create new kinds of harm, and they do it at a massive scale because they're automated.
And third, that big promise of objectivity and efficiency. It often hides the reality of automatic decision-making that lacks crucial human context, fairness, and transparency. These algorithms are definitely not infallible predictors of human potential or what someone will do in the future.
Absolutely. And based on that, here are maybe the most important sort of actionable takeaways you should keep in mind from this whole investigation. First, resume screeners and those personality prediction tools, including the ones scanning your social media. Be skeptical. They often use faulty correlations, lack real scientific backing, and can give wildly inconsistent results, as the author's own tests showed.
Second takeaway, those gamified assessments and video interviews, they often use automatic cut scores to reject people, and they do this based on metrics that have very little proven ability to predict actual job performance. We saw proof of this in internal emails and successful legal challenges.
Third, all that digital surveillance tracking keystrokes, ranking employees, it demonstrably increases stress and burnout. It doesn't really improve performance and mostly just encourages people to waste time trying to game the system.
Fourth point, using predictive analytics for things like promotions or flight risk. It needs extreme caution. Relying only on historical data patterns can unfairly penalize people who take non-traditional career paths, like women taking parental leave, and it can create that dangerous self-fulfilling prophecy where the prediction causes the outcome.
And finally, maybe the most crucial takeaway. The lack of transparency, the difficulty people face just getting evidence when they suspect algorithmic harm, makes it incredibly hard to challenge automated rejections. This is especially true for people with disabilities. Often, your fate is decided by an invisible piece of code you can't even appeal to.
Thanks for tuning in to the Future of Us Bookcast. We hope you found inspiration in these ideas. Don't forget to subscribe and share together. We're co-creating the world of tomorrow.